Welcome to the 700 Club. It's an historic day where we celebrate Martin Luther King Jr. We also are celebrating the inauguration of Donald Trump as the 47th president. Same time, Israel is welcoming home 3 hostages in the first stage of a ceasefire in Gaza.
We have coverage from our bureaus in Jerusalem and Washington, D.C., beginning in Israel, where they're celebrating the release of the hostages with a wary eye on what some see as a questionable deal. Julie Stahl reports.
Joy and tears surrounded the 3 women, Emily Damari, Doron Steinbrecher, and Romy Gonen, as they returned to Israel and the embrace of family and friends. As the 3 arrived at the Sheba Medical Center outside Tel Aviv, the crowd went wild. Friends were beside themselves with joy.
Our hearts are bursting, exploding. She looks just like she did when she left, as special and beautiful as she is.
Inside, the medical professionals took over.
I'm happy to report that they are in stable condition that allows us and them to focus on what is the most important thing for now, is reuniting with their families.
The Israeli military's chief spokesman weighed in after the women's release.
We cannot imagine the horrors these 3 young women have endured in 50 months of Hamas captivity.
Until the last moment in Gaza, the 3 hostages were terrorized, with Hamas gunmen and a mob of Gazan civilians surrounding their convoy and screaming at them. Hamas gave them gift bags with certificates of release, a map of Gaza, and photos of their time in captivity. Then the women were handed over to the Red Cross, which transported them into the hands of Israeli forces. As soon as the ceasefire took place, scores of armed Hamas fighters appeared from their hiding places and quickly took control again in the streets of Gaza. They're declaring they've won a mighty victory over Israel. This image of a conquering Hamas terrorist with his foot on the back of kneeling Benjamin Netanyahu is making the rounds in Arab media. The head of Hamas's military wing put out a video calling for Palestinians in the so-called West Bank to escalate their attacks on Israel. Hagari says the IDF is ready to face any threat.
In this agreement, there are risks and there are challenges. We know how to come back and fight and stand up for all the goals of the war.
Shortly after Hamas freed the 3 women hostages, Israel began releasing 90 Palestinian prisoners, the first of more than 1,000 to be released, some of them terrorists who murdered Jews in well-known attacks, one of the most frightening aspects for Israelis. As the deal goes forward, Hamas is supposed to release 30 more prisoners in the coming weeks in exchange for hundreds more terrorists. Negotiations are supposed to continue until all hostages are released and a permanent ceasefire is in place. With the Trump administration taking over today, Senator Lindsey Graham insists Hamas' declaration of victory will be short-lived.
This war will never end with Hamas in charge of Gaza, politically or militarily. Their days are numbered.
Graham also suggests that the new administration gives support to Israel in dealing with an even larger threat, an Iran that could soon be armed with nuclear bombs.
I am hoping there will be an effort by Israel to decimate the Iran nuclear program supported by the United States, and if we don't do that, it will be a historical mistake.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, CBN News Middle East Bureau Chief Chris Mitchell joins us now. And Chris, I've just got to observe, it looked like Hamas was well funded. I mean, those were brand new uniforms. They had plenty of weapons. Nobody looked like they were starving. What about all these reports of just the horror in Gaza? It just didn't seem to be reflected in that visual.
Yeah, for the last 15 months, a lot of people have been saying there's a genocide, and now they're declaring victory. And some people are saying, well, which is it? Is it genocide or victory? And obviously, they're getting some funding. And part of that funding, people are saying, Gordon, comes from the humanitarian aid that has been coming in, that actually Hamas steals perhaps up to 40% or more of that humanitarian aid to fund what they're doing. And now they're above ground, no longer in the tunnels, and no longer without uniforms. Now they're with uniforms, and they typically do that only when there's a ceasefire. But I would say, you know, Gordon, coming back, and I've been in the States for a few weeks, coming back here to Israel and just sensing the mood here in the atmosphere, So many Israelis are really reeling. They're conflicted about what's going on. The hostages for 15 months have been an open wound on Israeli society. Israel's a big family. They're euphoric about the release of Doron, Romy, and Emily. Tears, celebrations, and yet on the other hand, there's a real concern that the released prisoners, there's been 90 so far, and they're planning to be up to 1,700. So there's a big discussion in Israel right now about the deal. Earlier, I talked to a rabbi and explained to me that everyone in Jewish life is pro-life. Life is their highest value. Everyone's jubilant for Doron, Emily, and Romy. But when is the price of one hostage more than you should pay? When does it cost even more lives? And when does it incentivize your enemy to kidnap more? And that's the anguish that Israelis are facing right now and have faced for 15 months. It's excruciating. And Gordon, it's not theoretical. It's been chronicled. In 2011, more than 1,000 Palestinian prisoners were released for just one IDF soldiers. And those terrorists, they killed over 190 Israelis, including Yahya Sinwar, the leader of Hamas, who eventually masterminded October 7th.
Well, I guess it's a difference in ideology. Here in the United States, we like to pride ourselves that we never negotiate with terrorists. Unfortunately, that can get a little squishy sometimes. We don't necessarily have such a hard line with it. But in Israel, they view that if you save one life, it's as if you've saved the entire world. And so they don't look at it as just that one life, but the generations that would follow. And so it's a weighing, and it seems like it's creating some political division within the current government, and some factions are leaving. Are we looking at I guess, a mid-war election? Is Netanyahu's government at risk now?
It's very much at risk right now, Gordon. Perhaps the greatest risk so far, even under the Biden administration. Ben Gvir, he's one of the coalition members. He's resigned and he's left the coalition. He calls the deal a capitulation to terror. He's going to support the government from the outside. That means that when legislation comes out, he'll vote with the coalition. But it really leaves Netanyahu with a very slim majority. A few weeks ago, Foreign Minister Gideon Sa'ar, his party, the New Hope, came in, and that keeps that slim majority. But on the other hand, a man named Bezalel Smotrich, he's the finance minister. He's from the religious Zionist party. He says he's going to pull out of the government if after phase one, they don't go back to fighting Hamas. And that would, Netanyahu then would lose his majority, may collapse the government. So Netanyahu really right now, he's balancing appeasing the Trump administration, satisfying those who want to release the hostages at any cost, and also staying in power. And that's why he, as well as many leaders here, really need prayer right now.
Well, we certainly are praying for Israel and praying for the entire situation. We have a new president being sworn in today, and you look at the situation in Gaza, and it's pretty clear to me in the ceasefire, Hamas is now asserting control. They're now the police force, if you will, of Gaza, and they're going to enforce their domination of government there. So what is the incoming Trump administration going to do with that?
Well, the incoming Trump administration probably is the most pro-Israel foreign policy team in history. You have Marco Rubio, the designated Secretary of State, at his confirmation hearing. He said, how can any nation coexist side by side with a group of savages like Hamas? Pete Hegseth, perhaps the next Secretary of Defense, he said, I support killing every last member of Hamas. Mike Waltz, he's the incoming National Security Advisor. On CBS Face of the Nation, he said Hamas will never govern Gaza. That's completely unacceptable. And he added that he wants Israelis to hear me loud and clear. If Hamas reneges on the deal, we will support Israel in doing what it has to do. And then you have incoming ambassador to Israel, Governor Mike Huckabee, who's been a strong supporter of Israel for many decades. The question over here, some people are asking, Gordon, is what about Steve Witkoff? He's the wild card for some people. He's the Middle East envoy. And many here in Israel, and I just talked to a reporter earlier today about this, about his connections to Qatar. The Qatar Investment Authority Sovereign Wealth Fund purchased his hotel, the Park Lane Hotel in New York City, for $623 million from his real estate company. Some question over here whether those financial dealings, can he be an honest broker, especially when Qatar, for decades, Gordon, has been the chief sponsor of Hamas. And so some wonder and hope and pray there is something to this deal that really isn't known publicly. And one people are saying, does this mean the U.S. is going to help destroy Iran's nuclear program as one of perhaps the unknown deals in this deal? But right now, we don't know. And that's why some people are asking for 42 days of prayer for the next 42 days, which is the first phase of this deal.
Well, we certainly need to be in prayer, but the reports I'm hearing is that the incoming Trump administration, and whether it was through the envoy or through other channels, put pressure on Netanyahu to come to this deal. So what's involved in that pressure? But it seems in the aftermath, today on the ground in Gaza, on the first day of the ceasefire, Hamas is clearly in control of Gaza and clearly in power. And so, what is the Trump administration going to do with that? Because that's the outcome of the ceasefire. Well, we'll certainly be in prayer. Chris, thanks so much for joining with us, and thanks for being on the Watchman on the Wall. We'll be hearing a lot from you as this 42 days continues, and hopefully at the end of it, there'll be a peace that lasts. Well, here at home, the 45th President of the United States is now set to become the 47th President of the United States. Some are calling it the second coming of Donald Trump. Well, Donald John Trump will take the oath of office shortly after noon today, and armed with a very long list of priorities, he plans to hit the ground running. CBN's David Brody explains.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
8 years ago today, Donald Trump took the oath of office and now becomes only the second president to win a non-consecutive term. Now he's back with an aggressive agenda and a new strategy, according to Trump's first White House press secretary, Sean Spicer.
4 years out of office have really given him an opportunity to think through the agenda that he wants to get done. And the way I look at it is there's three components to that. There's the people, the process, and the policy.
In other words, Trump is surrounding himself with people he knows and trusts, rather than depending on the D.C. establishment. They are aware of the obstacles to overcome in getting his legislative agenda implemented. In the first 100 days, there are three main priorities: passing a border security bill that includes funds to finish the border wall and his mass deportation plan. Number two, repealing big portions of Joe Biden's signature climate bill to clear the way for his energy initiatives. And three, ensuring that the tax cuts he signed into law are extended.
As we saw with Trump's first tax cuts when it was passed in 2017, in 2018 and 2019, there was significant economic growth as a result. There was also more tax revenue coming in to the federal government. And so I think if Donald Trump is looking for ways that he can make sure that we're looking at 3% or 3.5% or even 4% growth in this country, yes, tax reform is an important way to do that.
When it comes to executive orders, there's talk that the 47th president could sign 100 or more on day one. The list includes a crackdown on illegal immigration, energy development, and regulations stating there are only two genders. And that's just the beginning of a likely whirlwind of activity that will continue for the next 4 years. Incoming Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt will be the main person tasked with communicating the agenda. Spicer shares tips from his experience at the podium.
I would say to her and everybody else, not that they need my advice, but Donald Trump has a very clear vision of what he wants done, how he wants it done, and how he wants it communicated. And so before you go rolling things out, make sure you check with him.
The president-elect has said himself to expect pardons for those involved on January 6th. Also, possible expansion into Greenland and the Panama Canal, plus peace deals in Ukraine and the Middle East. And add to all of that, getting all of his cabinet members confirmed as quickly as possible. Gordon?
Well, David, I'm hearing as many as 200 executive orders are in his pocket. and likely he'll start signing right after he gets sworn in. He's not even going to, he's going to do it immediately. Is that the right number? I mean, you said 100, but I'm hearing double that number. Is that what we should expect?
Well, on Sunday evening, President Trump said about 100 or so. I guess we'll see what the or so portion of this will be, but at least 100. Could it rival 200? Possibly. And we're looking at all different things, Gordon. Obviously, immigration, energy, gender, ideology, all of that. And we can get into the specifics of all of that. But on immigration, he's going to declare an emergency at the border. And what does that mean exactly? Why would he do that? Because he needs funds to carry out the mass deportation that he wants to do across the country. And the way when you create a national emergency on X topic, you can move funds around more easily. That'll be part of it. Remember, the continuing resolution that is in place right now expires in March, so there's only a certain amount of money you can use right now until March, and they figure that out. That's why he needs more money to get this done.
Well, I remember when President Bush declared an emergency in New Orleans, it meant the Third Army got deployed. Are we looking at our armed forces, more than just National Guard, but our armed forces being deployed on the border?
Well, just to be clear, there's been a lot of confusion about that. There's no expectation that the military is going to be used from an armed perspective to take care of anything going on the ground. It would be more, like you said, National Guard, potentially some military, but once again, nothing like you would see, like commandos moving in or anything like that. That's not the point. It's just more boots on the ground, if you will, just to make sure that there's a peaceful process going on. But look, the mass deportations, Gordon, are expected to start tomorrow in Chicago, Tuesday morning, Chicago and other cities across this country. And the reason you wonder, well, why Chicago specifically? Well, the mayor there has specifically said he's going to get in the way. They are a sanctuary city, and he's not going to let the federal government and ICE agents come in and do that. Well, that raises a constitutional question because, remember, the federal government is in charge with enforcing immigration in this country. So Tom Homan, who's going to be the border czar, has said, well, wait a minute. Actually, we'll take you to court over that. So I see a legal fight brewing here between mayors of sanctuary cities who say, not on my dime, not on my watch, and the federal government.
Let's talk about legislation. You got slim majorities in the Senate and the House, and so I assume acting quickly is the order of the day. Trump has called for one beautiful bill. I assume it's going to be one big, beautiful bill. So what can we expect in legislation?
Well, talking to insiders here in Washington, there's a sense that the bill would start as one beautiful bill and then potentially end up as two mini beautiful bills. Who knows exactly how this is going to go? But in Washington, if you don't have the votes, you don't have the votes. And the one beautiful bill, what we're talking about specifically is budget reconciliation. I know it's a lot of syllables and a lot of words. Well, actually, it's only 2 words, but a lot of syllables. And within budget reconciliation, the reason they're doing it this way is because you only need 50 votes in the Senate, not 60, to get it passed, and you only need a simple majority in the House of Representatives. So it's the easiest way to get a lot of what he wants accomplished done quickly in the first 100 days. Remember, Gordon, in the first term with President Trump, the administration, spent a good 6 months or so trying to repeal Obamacare, and then John McCain gave the big thumbs down, and that was the end of Obamacare. So they are determined not to repeat that this time. That's why they want the one big beautiful bill, to get it all going, hopefully by April or so, to get it passed, which would be, what, about 90 days in or so. So we'll see if that happens.
Let's talk about some pardons. I think Biden surprised a lot of people with just the sheer number, but to add to it, just to Dave Fauci, everyone involved in the impeachment committees, it just seems to be a pretty long list. What's Trump going to do with that?
Well, first of all, as you might imagine, he'll have a few things to say about that later today or even on Tuesday. I mean, but the fact that this is unprecedented, that Anthony Fauci would be pardoned, of course, a lot of conservative critics will say, well, there you go. It's what we've been saying all along, that he's guilty of quite a few crimes, and let's start listing them here. And that's why he had to pardon Fauci. Of course, the Biden administration will say something completely different. But this is not just Anthony Fauci. It's Mark Milley. It's everyone on the January 6th committee. That includes Liz Cheney. So, look, I mean, this was somewhat expected by President Biden, but it is unprecedented. And having said that about pardons, the controversy will turn to January 6th and what he does specifically regarding pardoning folks that were involved in January 6th. President Trump's been very clear. He is going to do that on his first day in office. He's going to pardon folks from January 6th. The question is, to what extent? Will it be all of them? Will it be just the nonviolent offenders? I know specifically from the intel that I've received that it's definitely going to be the nonviolent offenders. The question then just becomes, what about some of those violent offenders? And this is the problem for President Trump, because there's a lot of folks in MAGA that want everybody, even the violent offenders, pardoned. But I'm not quite sure that's going to happen, and that might, how do we say it, tick off a few in the MAGA set.
Well, it already has, from the chatter I'm looking at. They're already up in arms, if I can use that phrase, about that very issue. Speaking of up in arms, some of the nominees for the administration have raised controversy. Are we looking at just sort of that being railroaded through? You've got the majority and just say, okay, you know, we've had the hearing, here's the gavel, and now let's vote. Is that going to be the end result here?
Ultimately, the answer is yes. There is one caveat there. Keep your eye on Tulsi Gabbard. She's the one that may not get through as DNI chief. There's a lot of concern about some of her views on foreign surveillance and intelligence and Section 720 and a few other things as well. So there's a little concern about her for sure. Other than that, it's all pretty much looks like it's going to happen. And as a matter of fact, what you're going to see later this afternoon on Monday is Marco Rubio will get confirmed. He'll be the first cabinet member confirmed, the Secretary of State. And then after that, today as well, you will see Pete Hegseth and many others voted out of committee and then onto the floor. So Kristi Noem, Pete Hegseth, John Ratcliffe, the head of DNI, or I'm sorry, did I say DNI? CIA. I get them all confused. So much alphabet soup in Washington. But you'll see all of those folks voted out of committee, which means floor votes expected in the coming days, Gordon.
Well, get your alphabet on, because this is going to be a race. If what I'm seeing, it's literally going to start this afternoon. And as soon as the hand goes on the Bible and one hand goes in the air and the swearing in happens, the change is going to be absolutely immediate. So, yeah.
I do want to just say one last thing. You mentioned the Bible. 2 Bibles that Donald Trump will be sworn in on today. The Bible that his mother gave him and the Lincoln Bible. So a double Bible swearing in ceremony today for Donald Trump.
Yeah. He's already making history. Well, David, thanks for joining with us, and you're going to be very busy. You can watch the CBN News live coverage of the inauguration. It's going to start 11:30 Eastern Time, a.m. on the CBN News Channel and all of our digital platforms. And so, see history in the making.